Hello Andre, this is video 2 of my um, final engines sprint submission, starting from scene management in the grading checklist. So here we are in the scene manager header file. I'll show the whole thing. We forward declare the 3 scene change command classes. These are the 2 actual commands. This is just the command base, and the reason I do this will become apparent in a second, but I will go down. We have the setter and getter functions for the current scene. I can set next scene, and I have the change scene function here for the uh, to be accessed using the command pattern. Set up as a singleton. Obviously, here I set up my 3 command pointers to be used for the changing scenes. I have 2 scene pointers, one for current scene and one for next scene. I'm a friend class of the engine, and I have the private non-static classes that are internal, as well as the update draw. Um, so the main job of this manager is, as you said, to send the update and draw text to the scene. Well, in the constructor, I set up two new commands, and I set my current command to the null command. Just to start from. This way it just makes changing scenes easier to start from a empty command instead of starting from the first scene. Um, my scene manager delete just deletes the pointer instance. I believe this is called in Undyne at the very end. We'll just make sure this gets called on exit as it does. Um, um, so I'll go over sending the update and draw ticks. Um, so in update, through the scene attorney scene management functions, I call update and pass in the current scene, and this way I'm always, I'll just go to this function, and this sends the scene, the current scene, and calls execute and process on all the various manager um, process events. Right after this, I call execute on the current command, which should either be the null command, which does nothing, or the next command, which will change the scene. In the draw, I'm doing something similar, except instead of um, these managers processes, I'm calling the visual brokers process visualize commands and the draw managers process elements. The order of this matters, but I'll get back to that in a second. I went over access to current scene, scene changing. Okay, so I'll go over that in more detail. So first I set up my next command and my null. Oh, I went over this already. I apologize. Scene changing. So the user would call in the user code private set next scene, which just takes the scene and calls. It just takes in the scene, sets the manager's next scene to the scene that's passed that wants to be changed to, and then I set my current command to equal a next command. And if I go into my next command, as you can see, all it does is call change scene on execute. So if we go into my user code, inside game objects, inside the plane.cpp, I have my set next scene here, and we can breakpoint this and follow it. So if I press Y, it'll change the scene. I call set next scene. This goes to the scene manager, which then calls the private set next scene internally. As you can see, this will set the next scene and then create the next command as we went over. It will then create a new command which calls change scene. And if I go here, it takes us right back to the scene manager, to the change scene function. This calls the end current scene through the scene attorney. I then delete the current scene. I set current scene to the next scene. I initialize the current scene now that has been set to the next scene. I set next scene back to null pointer, and I set the current command to a null command. And I believe the commands are would be in scene.cpp. The scene registration broker, I believe, is in charge of processing those commands. Scene registration. I'm sorry for taking so much time. Scene registration broker takes in the scene commands and calls execute on all of those commands. I believe. No, this is not it. This is not. It's not the scene registration broker. I am so sorry. Why am I blanking on where this is processed right now? Or is it the? I believe it is the scene registration broker.